Kirk math. Welcome back again. We are continuing our Algebra 1 Semester 2 Study Guide review. These are questions 21 through 30. Most of the questions in this section are all about factoring and multiplying products and adding and subtracting, binomials and polynomials. So let's get started. So on 21, we are subtracting two sets of polynomials. And so similar to adding the polynomials, what we're going to do is combine like terms, except when we subtract, I have to distribute this negative. Okay, so we're basically pretending, well, not pretending, this is what's happening, is this is a -1. And we're multiplying the -1 by x squared, we're multiplying it by minus 3x, and we're multiplying it by positive 2. So that's just going to change the signs of all of these. So the new problems, the new trinomials, are going to be -x squared plus 3x minus 2. Now, when I go to combine like terms, we're going to put them together. So I've got x squares here. And then the next one we have are x's. So I have minus 5x and positive 3x. And then I have my constants. So I have plus 7 and minus 2. So we're going to go ahead and put these guys together and get negative 7x, which means I already know that those two cannot possibly be answer choices. Plus, let's see, minus 5x plus 3x. Going to make minus 2x plus 7 minus 2, that's plus 5. So the one that matches is I. So similar to what we did last time, we will highlight our answers so you can see them clearly. All right, let's try finding the product this time. All right, we have, why isn't that working? There we go. C, and then 23 is going to be E. So let's explain these. All right. 22, we're finding the product, which means that we are multiplying. So there are several different ways we learned how to do this. You could FOIL, but with a trinomial, I sometimes prefer not to FOIL because it starts getting very complicated as we have many arrows crossing and many numbers going over each other. So another thing that we could do instead is the box method, where I put my binomials and trinomials into kind of a box. So this one is try, so I'm going to need 3 spots. X squared minus 3x plus 8. And then we're going to kind of multiply them this way. There's lots of different ways. So we are going to go ahead. I'm going to show it in the box method. But like I said, you could FOIL, doing each piece in your head and writing them out and then combining like terms, whatever works for you. But what I'm going to do is x squared times 4x squared. So remember, we multiply the whole numbers, the coefficients. And then we multiply the powers, but when we multiply powers, we add the exponents. So we're multiplying the big numbers and we're adding the little exponents. So this is really 1x squared. So this is going to be 4x to the 4th, because x squared times x squared is x to the 4th. X squared times x squared is x2 plus 2, which is x to the 4th. So now I'm going to do x squared times 6, that's 6x squared. Negative 3x times 4x squared, so negative 3 times 4 is negative 12. And then x to the 1st times x squared is x to the 3rd. Then I'm going to do negative 3x times 6, that's going to be negative 18x. 8 times 4x squared, 32x squared, and then 6 times 8 is 48. All right, so what I'm doing now is I'm going to look for those common terms. So I've got my x to the 4th here. Okay, I've got my x to the 3rd here. There's no other x's to the 3rds. I've got my x squareds here. Then my single x's. We'll do green. And then finally my constants. So if I write this out, I'm going to get 4x to the fourth minus 12x to the third, 6x squared plus 32x squared makes 38x squared, minus 18x plus 48. So the only things I had to combine were my yellow pieces here, and those were my x squared. Everything else ended up being its own term. Okay, that is why we get C. All right, on number 23, we have another one of those pictures and frame problems. So my inside shape, the length or the height of this picture is 1.5 times W right here. And W is my width. The frame itself is 4 inches wider than the portrait all along its perimeter. So every single side is 4 inches longer than the picture itself. So in order to write a expression, the width is going to be the width plus 8, because we've got the width plus 4 plus 4. The length is going to be 1.5 W plus 8. And then we're going to factor. So this one's just a binomial times a binomial, so foiling works really well. So we're going to do W times 1.5 W. That's 1.5 W squared. We're going to do W times 8. That's 8W. We're going to do 8 times 1.5 W. That is 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 W. And then we're going to do 8 times 8, which is 64. Okay, combine our like terms here. And you're going to get 20W in the middle, which means that E has to be our answer. We also know that because our end pieces have to be 64. All right, continuing on with polynomials and products and factoring, we're going to multiply a binomial squared. So we are technically doing 2y minus 6 times 2y minus 6. So you're also just going to be squaring the 2y, squaring the minus 6, and then multiplying the 2y and the negative 6 together and timesing that by 2. That's kind of the fast way to do it if you are doing it in your head. But if you're going to FOIL it out, then we're just doing it this way. So 2y times 2y is 4y squared. So all of them have 4y squared. 2y times negative 6 is negative 12y, and that's going to be doubled because remember 6 times 2y is negative 12y as well. So we're going to have 4y squared minus 24y. Again, this is plus 24, so I now know it's just between B and D. And then I'm going to do negative 6 times negative 6, which is positive 36. So our answer is D. Okay, here we're now factoring our perfect square trinomial. So we learned a lot of different ways to do this as well, but for the most part, we're going to be taking the square root of 81. Okay, that is 9. So we know that it's going to be x and it's going to be a 9. All of this is going to be squared. We need to figure out if it's positive or negative. If B is negative and C is positive, then our binomial needs to be negative. And that is because you can see up here in this top problem, a negative times a negative makes a positive C. A negative times the first term here and the first term times the last term, both of those are going to be negatives that add together to stay more negative. So if it's negative for B, positive for C, it's negative in the middle. If they're both positive, so you can write this down, negative and positive means negative in your perfect square. Positive, positive means positive in your perfect square. Negative and negative means something else that has to do with your numbers being, as you can't do a perfect square this way. You can have the two negatives, but it would depend on if your answer is going to be positive or negative. If your B, not your answer, if your terms when you factor, right, are positive or negative, you want the bigger number to be negative. And that's not going to happen in a perfect square trinomial because you're always going to have the same value here, right? This area right here, the -9, it will always be this value. If it's -9, it's always negative. If it's positive, it's always positive. We can't have both. And so you're not going to have that for perfect square trinomials. All right, this is where we start to get that kind of difference with our negatives and positives, is when we have a, both of our terms, these are perfect squares, 36 and 1, but it's not a binomial squared, it's just a perfect square binomial. And so I'm not going to have parentheses for this one. I'm just going to find the square root of each section, and then we're splitting them up. Because this is negative in the middle, one will be positive and one will be negative. So to review how to solve this, you're going to have square root of 36, square root of 1. That's how we get the 6y and the 1. And because of the negative there, we're going to have one be positive and the other one be negative. That's also because there's no b. Okay. If there was a b, then we would have to figure out what you would need in order for it to stay b. But because there's no b, I'm going to do opposite signs because the 6y times -1 and the 1 times 6y, right? 6y times -1 and the 1 times 6y are going to cancel each other out, and there will be no b value. So our answer is G. Number 27 is looking again at our binomial degrees, so similar to some of the questions we had previously in videos, except we're looking at all of the degrees. So even if they're not written in standard form, where we go from the highest degree to the smallest, we're going to look at all the degrees of each term and identify which ones are third degree. That means that the exponents of the variables add up to 3. A cannot be a third degree binomial because this x is a value of 1. So this is really a fourth degree. Here, 2 plus 1 makes 3. So B is correct. Here, the 3 and the 4 makes 7. That is not a third degree. And here, the x to the first plus the y to the second makes 3. So our answers for this one are B and D. All right, so our next question, 28, is talking about these two functions, g of x and f of x, and we want to know the difference between them. If you remember correctly, when I have -5, when my numbers are the absolute value of the a is greater than 1, that means that it has a steeper slope, so it's going to be narrower. So a cannot be the answer. Because the a value here is negative, and this one is the parent function, which is positive, they do not open in the same direction. However, they will have the same vertex because we're not adding anything or subtracting anything from the x value. Right? We don't have x plus 1 squared. That would mean the vertex is changed. It's not x squared minus 1. That would also mean the vertex is changed. And then we know they're the same axis of symmetry because if they have the same vertex, then that axis of symmetry is also the same. 29, we're looking at this. We've had one of these on our test before. We're using the -b, well, the x equals -b over 2a formula. This is where I'm getting my information for x. So we know that x, and look at the scale, this is -6. This is -2. That's -6. So -6 is x. We don't know what b is. We know that a is 2. Okay, it's a b. So now we're going to do -6 equals -b divided by 4 times both sides by 4 to get -24 equals -b, times both sides by -1 to get 24, positive 24. So that's why we get D. For our last one, we're trying to figure out what kind of model this is. We're starting to subtract our y values. I like to go backwards, so I did 36 minus 30 and all the way back. Our first differences were not constant, so it is not linear. Our second differences were constant.